It's Time to Talk, Why Moms Want to End Prohibition. Joining us in our discussion today is Sharon Ravert of Peachtree NORML, Diane Goldstein of LEAP, Rebecca Forbes from Cannabis Coalition, and Ebony Knight from Project Freedom. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists. My name is Finan. I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. For the audience, I would ask that you please keep all questions until the end of the panel, when we'll have about a 10-minute question and answer portion. Ladies, thank you for joining us today. Legal advocates have found that female support tends to be a leading indicator of whether or not marijuana measures live or die. Women, especially mothers, need to be assured marijuana legalization is sound policy and that their children will not be adversely affected. Keeping that in mind, my first question to our panelists would be, you are all mothers. What led you to the conclusion that legalization of marijuana would not adversely affect your children and that it was sound policy? And I'll start with Sharon and we'll go down the line.
Thank you. That's a great question, Greg. I'm not sure that it won't affect our children. Every policy we make affects our children. I would say that I believe it will affect them in a better way. Prohibition is ripping apart the fabric of our society. I will tell you quickly my story and the reason I became a marijuana legalization advocate. My daughter had some friends over to the house, like all kids do, and 6 hours after they left, we had 6 Appalachian Drug Task Force in military guard with their guns drawn and a couple of our local sheriffs in my house. They didn't knock on my door or ring the doorbell. They came in. They didn't have to bust down the doors. They thought we were drug dealers that slept with our doors wide open. But they walked right in my house and they came down my hallway and bammed on my bedroom door. I got up and I answered it and I saw all these police and I'm thinking, they are at the wrong house. What are they doing here? Unbeknownst to me, one of the gentlemen that my daughter had gone to school with that she hadn't seen in a couple of years, she was 19 at the time and already in college, she had brought, some people had come over and he, unbeknownst to me, had drugs in his backpack. I didn't realize I needed to find that out before he came in my house. I'm sorry, I get emotional. He left, got busted. They came back into my house. They searched our house for 3 hours. They found enough to roll a joint. They found 1.5 grams. Unfortunately, it was not my daughter's, but the young lady who was spending the night with her. Of course, she, unbeknownst to us, I won't get into all that. What it did to our family, it took my youngest daughter, who was 4 years younger, and made her angry at her sister. It made her angry at me for supporting her sister. It made her not be able to have friends come to the house anymore because I was not going to search people's book bags when they came in my house to see if they had drugs or not. That's not my job. My job is trying to keep the drugs away from my child. And as a parent, before I knew all of the stuff that I know now and went into searching out and doing the research on how it was affecting other families, I would have freaked out if I had found a joint in my kid's room. But I would have taken care of it. That's what I tell people all the time. I don't want my kids doing drugs, but if I find a marijuana cigarette in their bedroom, I want to deal with it. If I can't deal with it, I'll bring their dad in, I'll bring their sister in, I'll bring my family in, the clergy in, anybody else in. But I don't feel like they need to bust down doors and pull kids out of bed. My daughter had a gun put in her head. Her alarm went off to go to school that morning while that gun was on her head. If he had adjourned, she could have ended up dead. And this would have been a much different story. I wouldn't be here talking to you because I'd be in jail too. Okay? So needless to say, I started doing research. Every morning I got up and I Googled marijuana, marijuana law reform, marijuana legalization, marijuana in children, and I would read the first story or two. 7 years ago when this happened, she's now 26 and she just graduated with landscape architecture at UGA. I'm going to throw that in. The point I make about that is we had saved money for her to go to college, and we had to use all of that money to defend her in court with lawyers so that she could go to college and actually get a job when she got out. Because if you have to check that little mark every day for the rest of your life when you go in and sign up for an application, you're not going to get that job. And I knew it was imperative that we protect her record in order for her to succeed. So we took that money out and paid for lawyers. And 2 years later, of course, they asked us to take all kinds of plea deals, and we demanded a jury trial. There was a lot wrong with our case, and I won't go into that. But when I saw the detrimental effects of what that did to my family, this is one person out of the 750,000 that they arrested. I'm thinking this is going on everywhere else. 6 months later, if you're from Atlanta, you know about the situation with Katherine Johnston. That's when I really got angry. The police came into a bad neighborhood. They had a bad address. They went on a 92-year-old woman, and they executed her. I'm not exactly sure, and I don't want to exaggerate, but it was over 10 or 15 shots went into the lady's body. Reason being, she was in a neighborhood that she was afraid of to stay in. There was a lot of drug dealing and prostitution and things going on. She didn't know who was coming in the door. If they had knocked or rang the doorbell, she would have gladly let them in. That is a problem, yes. The worst problem is when they got caught, they planted marijuana in her house. And that made me think, what is going on here when something like this can happen at all? And then they're going to think that everybody out listening to the media is going to say, oh, well, it's okay that happened now because she had pot in her house. So I started getting more and more involved. I started talking to people in my community. Am I running out of time? I don't want to go on. I own a business. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm an ambassador for them. I started talking to my clients. I had over 600 at the time. I haven't lost a one of them, by the way. They support me. They say they're proud of me every time they walk in the door. The people that do not understand what's going on need to hear from us mothers. And we're the ones that ended Prohibition in the 30s. And no offense to you guys, y'all done a great job. We just want to hold your hands and walk with you now. Okay? I went and started talking to these people. We had an election coming up a year later. I knew the sheriff. I knew every police officer that was in my house. I started telling people about it, and they were able to look at my daughter, and they knew her. She had grown up there. And they knew that she wasn't a criminal. And that tended to help the situation. About 18 months later, after talking to all these people, and I know when you talk to somebody, they talk to other people. They tell other people. I live in a small town. We came up and I was begging people to please vote for the new sheriff. I knew him. He knows children. He knows the kids. And I thought he would be a little bit easier on the kids. I've gotten some things from him through talking, and I thought he will be a better option. We went down to the courthouse for the first time in 15 years that I've lived in this town. For the first time to hear the results. He won 2-1. He got 2 votes to every one of the other gentlemen. That man can't find a job in Toronto. He had to go to Afghanistan to find a job, our sheriff. Okay? It can be done by a few people. You just have to talk. Please go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think one of the things that has made me more impassioned the last few years, despite my brother's tragic death, is I realize that there's a lot of other people that have been touched by the war on drugs in this fashion. And I think that the more stories we share in public, the more stories you share with politicians and with everybody, educators and cops is people get it and they understand the message. But I'll answer that question, why, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I raised my son. I was lucky. I had economic resources, I had a good job, I knew how to protect my child. What I saw in my career in law enforcement was that I couldn't protect the other children. And there's one thing that law enforcement has taught me is I have an obligation, not just to myself, not just to ensuring that my family's safe. That's what Mother's Day means to me. I've been writing about this every couple years, is I reflect back on what Mother's Day is all about, and it's about ensuring the future, not just of my child, or down the road his children, but everybody else's children. And what we are doing right now is inherently unsafe by abdicating control to criminals, drug cartels, and the thugs of the most precious resource that we have. And by appropriately using the job, because I'm not a big government person, but there are places to ensure some type of safety. It's not 100%. But we need to change back to make America a country of opportunity and not of punishment. So that's why I'm here.
The question was, how is ending prohibition, whether it's going to adversely affect our children? Was that the focus?
It was what led you to the conclusion.
What led me to this conclusion, that we need to end prohibition in regards to the children. I served 3 years in North Carolina State Prison in the late 90s, early 2000 for growing cannabis. I was a recreational user at that time. My daughter called cannabis flowers. Would have never encouraged a child ever to use cannabis. To me, that's an adult thing on that level. Unless the child, now that we know the miracles of medicine, unless they're sick, like Michaela Comstock, who I interact with quite frequently and follow. But what brought me into this was what happened to my family. Similar to Sharon, I met and fell in love with a very large marijuana farmer. I had used recreationally since the age of 12 or 13. And in getting involved with him, learned how to grow marijuana. And we grew a lot of marijuana in the North Carolina mountains. We were raided on average once or twice a year. They finally got us in 98, 97, 98. They finally got us big enough to put us both in prison. And my daughter was taken from me. My home was taken from me. My car was taken from me in the middle of Rutherford, North Carolina. The North Carolina Department of Revenue kindly escorted me out of my vehicle and drove away waving at me. In my car. Took me 2 years to get it back. They assumed that I was married to the man that I was with, and I was not. So they seized all my personal property as well until they figured out, no, she's not married to him. But when I got my car back, it was ruined. But the biggest thing was them taking my child. She was in foster care for 4 months. I literally had to give up custody to a friend because both parents were in prison to take my daughter to get her out of the state system. They approached me with a doctor who wanted to adopt my daughter because I was, of course, such a bad, horrible piece of shit of society because I had marijuana and I grew marijuana. They tried to get me to make a deal and turn somebody in from my town, and I told them what they could do with that. So they boxcarred me and I did 3 years in prison, 3 12-month sentences. I was released in 2002. I've quit smoking or using cannabis at all for 10 years because of the fear of prohibition. So I don't see prohibition adversely affecting children in any way. Removing parents from the home is detrimental to a child. Parents that they trust and love. We were farmers, we had chickens, we had pigs, we had a garden, and we grew a lot of pot, but we were good people. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. It's a very hard lifestyle. Unlike the cartel, we were a family. We trudged around the mountains and dug holes and grew a lot of pot and sold it to all our friends. some of them medical patients. So I think that in what we're doing and what got me involved in this and speaking out and educating people is the most important thing we can do. I lived a little nightmare, and the fear of going public, as I've done in the last 4 years, of approaching a legislator and approaching a police officer has totally diminished. So I encourage you to get more and more involved, because that fear does subside. This is a major political issue. Our children are affected. And I think if children were educated properly about cannabis, they would have more respect for it.
Well, I'm a mother of 6, and as a mother of 6, yes, I had one. Yeah. And while my immediate family has not been adversely affected by the drug war, my husband goes to work every day, he comes home every night, and my children, he's my 7th child. They play, and I have to tell them all to go to bed. So, but it's not enough. As a leader in my community and as a leader in the Black community, it's not enough for me and my personal huddle to be okay. When I look at the devastation that's going on in my community, 3 out of every 6 children will be adversely affected by current marijuana law policies. And so I find that the current drug policies are what's adversely affecting our families, not looking at the laws and reforming them. Taking children out of homes. Like, I wanted to share my personal story. I'd never used marijuana, growing up. I'm a preacher's kid. I was like, my brother did, and I would just look at him and I would be like, you're so sad. Like, you are such a weed head. Like, you really need to get some help. And then life continued, and life is the gateway drug, by the way. Not marijuana, life is the gateway drug. Life led me to medicine, and so after I used marijuana for myself, then I could make an educated opinion and say, okay, you're not a weed head, like, let's look at this thing again. So looking at that and then looking at what my background was, and now looking just even at the drug war, I'm all about justice, with not just us, as Black people say, it's just us, but I'm about justice and empowerment for Black people, white people, green people, yellow people, purple people, power to all people. And I find that this is not justice. The current laws are not justice. Financial aid. If you are caught with drugs, not just marijuana, if you're caught with drugs, then that's going to adversely affect your financial aid. If 3 of my 6 children couldn't get financial aid, because we don't come from a wealthy family. Like, everything that I have and that we have built has been off the sweat of our backs. So for my children not to be able to get financial aid because they did something that presidents have done that I fight for, then that's not justice either. So if they can't get financial aid and if they can be taken away from me as a parent, then we have to do something. We have to do something. One other thing, in the state of Georgia, they passed the law, but it's not really in effect. In order to get food stamps or TANF, they want to drug test you. I'm originally from New Jersey. In New Jersey, they tried the same thing. It was overturned. They proved that low-income families and minorities would be adversely affected by those policies. And if I don't have to say it, I don't have to play the race card because everybody's already said it. It's not just a war on drugs, it's a war on family, and it is a war on the Black community. And I've seen too many people, their mentality has been changed because the government said this. And so when instead of looking at people who are on drugs as political prisoners, as we used to, we look at them as drug dealers. And like they're not worthy of justice.
Excellent. Now that we have the rationales behind everyone supporting the end of marijuana prohibition, my next question would be, what information do you feel is vital for women and mothers in particular to understand when it comes to current marijuana policies? And because you're from Levi, I'm going to start with you first.
I think quite clearly Drug dealers don't ask for identification. And so I think I put that in the nutshell is that one of the things and I don't know if I really touched on it because there's so many facets to the war on drugs. I mean, I can do a whole hour on the constitutional issues, let alone, I mean, I could, 4 hours of having a discussion of how we change it. But I think it's so critically important to educate other mothers because what moms, I talk to a lot of Republican groups, a lot of Rotary clubs, and if you look at the polling, it's women, Latina women, and Black women who literally oppose ending marijuana prohibition the most. And so we have to reach out to them to educate them, to teach them that actually prohibition policy is much more dangerous, and what we need to do is present them with facts. The thing that was so critical about why Colorado and why Washington passed is both those campaigns took mothers, women, and criminal justice professionals and the elderly to speak for why it was so important to move us off the dime and move us in a different direction. And it was hard to discount that women message. We have the moral imperative, we have the moral authorities, we're the nurturers, we're the consensus builders. We are the muses of the men in our world that provide the home and the security, and it's our job to make sure our children are safe, and simply by showing them how prohibition makes their kids unsafe. Is everyone that I talked to from LEAP and the former criminal justice professionals, and everybody came to their own epiphany in a different way. I like to share Judge Gray's epiphany is when he would sit there as a Superior Court judge, and 20 years ago, before LEAP existed, he called a press conference in Orange County, and he declared that the war on drugs was a failure, which was an incredible thing to do as a sitting former federal prosecutor, Republican at that point. And what his epiphany moment was mandatory minimum sentencing, and when he had a couple kids who came in front of him, and he had no choice but to send them to jail for 18 months because they became addicted to methamphetamine, because when they went to their drug dealer, when they didn't have marijuana, what they did is they handed them another illicit harder substance. And so that happens all the time to our children. So we need to ensure that it's our job as parents to educate our kids. We need to ensure that there's smart regulatory processes, just like we do with alcohol and cigarettes. And we need to educate our kids to the harm. No different than being a mom. The thing that always works successfully for me as a parent is my job is to get you to delay any type of risk-taking behavior, whether you're going to engage in premarital sex or whether you're going to have your first drink or smoke a joint. My job is to delay that as long as possible, and then give you the facts so you can assess the risk properly, and then to do harm reduction strategies. So if you are drunk, you know that you can call me and I will come get you, and you don't have to drive a car. If you are somewhere and your friend is stoned or high, that you come get me and I make you safe. And I think that's the best way to approach it.
The information that I would want mothers to know, number one, is know your rights. A lot of people don't know their rights when it comes to search and seizure, but you really don't have a choice when they're kicking your door and you got 9mm to your head. So it's very scary. And some more information that I would give mothers. If they're really concerned about their child using cannabis, like getting their hands on cannabis, it is the one substance out here that they're probably going to come home alive. They're not going to die from the use of it. It's never killed a human being in 4 million years of use. Prohibition has killed a lot of people. I have 2 teenage foster children that I took in, a 10-year-old son that I adopted, and a 22-year-old daughter. And because of my position on drugs, and I talk to my kids about these things on a regular basis, I kind of know what's going on, because they'll tell me. The biggest problem we have with youth right now is prescription pills. Yeah. They are obtaining Ritalin like it's M&M candies from the doctors, They sell them to each other at school. We have this stuff going around now where they're soaking marijuana in formaldehyde. Do not ever buy any marijuana that is wrapped in tinfoil, please. This recently came to me through the youth. You know, there's such a disconnect now with parents and their children in talking about drugs that they don't come to their parents and talk to them. I'm one of those fortunate ones that they do. And they tell me they're taking the Ritalin pills and lighting them in a half of a light bulb and snorting the smoke off of it. They are mainlining heroin drugs like Oxycontin, Loratabs. There's these new things called, begins with an N, I can't remember what they're called, but it's a combination Oxycontin drug that they put gel in to try to keep people from mainlining it with a needle, but they figured out how to put it in the microwave, pop the gel caps, and they can still shoot it. These are children, people, doing this, not us. There's no way I would stick something like that in my body at my age. As you grow older, you grow more wiser, you know what works, you know what doesn't. You learn that alcohol kills your liver unless you've unfortunately become an alcoholic. But these kids are really experimenting with things they shouldn't be experimenting with because the marijuana laws are so harsh. You get caught for marijuana, first thing is you got bond out of jail, and normally your parents are going to have to do that. Number two, you're off to court where you're fined, you're put on some kind of drug program to convince you that you're such an addict that you need these programs. Then you end up paying court fines, probation fees for months. And then you're drug tested every month for probation. So just by chance you happen to smoke a joint with a buddy, you fail a drug test, your sentence is enacted and you go to prison anyway. So that's the nasty little scenario we have going on around marijuana with our youth, with the teenagers. And because the marijuana laws are so harsh and because it's illegal, as she said. Most drug dealers are not going to ID your kids. We were mountain growers. We only sold to adult friends. We had a lot of respect for our children. We would have never, allowed our children to stick a joint in their mouth. But a lot of people would out there. They don't care who they sell to because it's all about the money. So this is where a system of regulation and a system of IDing alcohol use is slowed down because kids have a harder time getting it. But illicit drugs are the easiest things for our kids to get our hands on. And marijuana is the least dangerous of them all. So that's something that mothers really need to realize, and that's what I pass on to them. And this is information that comes from my kids. So, enough said.
Advice I would give to mothers, first of all, is to just say no. K-N-O-W. Like, get your knowledge level up before you just blindly make decisions. Recently, I was at a parent's house, at family member's house, and there was a family controversy where the teenage son, he didn't use the marijuana, but his friend had marijuana at the house. The mother got so upset, she was so upset that she was ready to send her teenage son away because her son knew that the friend had marijuana. She was like, I'm not going to have my son walking around here being a weed head, blah, blah, blah. I was thinking, why am I here today? Like, this weed head thing. But the thing is, she has no knowledge level of anything. There's no view of marijuana other than being a weed head. So I would say read some books, hear patients' testimonies, like actually talk to people. Don't just listen to what the government has told you. Don't just listen to what your pastor has told you. Don't just listen to what your teachers have told you. Read some books and know what you're talking about. I have notes because I have short-term memory loss. I know I'm not the only one in the room. Study data. If you don't know how to study data, it's not as hard as it looks. I'm sure you can Google everything. You can learn how to study data. Really find out what it is that before you blindly make a decision, or teach your children what you were taught. Because if DARE is teaching our children that marijuana is this terrible substance, that if you use it, like all these terrible things are going to happen to you, and the first time they use marijuana, it doesn't happen, then the whole theory is flawed. And once your whole theory is flawed, then I'm going to question everything. I know some of you have been young. You're like, okay, they lied about that, so is this true too? And so, a lot of the things that you name, stuff that you get for the prescription over the counter. things that are killing our children come over the counter. Something that is actually helping people and healing people is grown from the ground and illegal. So I just would say, take off your mentality, open up your mind and to listen and to find out exactly it's not what it used to be. Legalization, decriminalization, and regulation, that's not the word you used earlier.
Oh,
Decriminalization is not about weed heads wanting to get high. It is about it's about common sense, scientific studies, and it's about the physical opportunities, and it's about freedom and justice.
They took everything I had written down. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I guess to moms, the thing I tell them the most is tell your kids the truth. Tell your kids the truth. If you know better about marijuana, even though they're learning it in dare, you need to tell them the truth so they'll at least believe you. That's the main thing. Just raise your children, teach them about marijuana, so like Ebony and the others have said, when they try that joint at that party for the first time and they go, really? Really? This is what this was about? When they go in the bathroom and they see their little friends cutting out a line of cocaine, they may not do it because you told them the truth. Okay? Yeah. The other thing I like to tell parents is once they're caught and they go into the probation system, we know that drugs don't stay in your system, harder drugs like marijuana does. Personally, I believe it's because our bodies need cannabis. Yeah. And so it holds on to that, rather than expelling it like a poison like it does with the other things.
Marijuana's not a poison. It's medicine.
Preach!
So I go down that route and I tell them stories about people because once you get involved like us up here and you start talking about this in your community, you have a lot of people call you and telling you stories to you. You have a lot of kids that wouldn't normally talk to somebody else talk to you about things. And I had a kid text me the other day, and I'll just share that text with you. She just got out of jail. I'm so sorry. Thank you all for being here and putting up with my tears. This is a culmination of a lot for me today. And I appreciate y'all being here and allowing me to cry a little bit. But
Where are your children?
the text message said, I just got out of jail for meth. And I'm so scared I'm going to go back to it. If I had cannabis, I know I could beat it.
Wow. We had a heroin addict at the North Carolina legislature about a month ago when we were fighting for the Medical Cannabis Act that was successfully staying off of heroin using cannabis.
That marijuana is an exit drug. I'm a cigarette smoker. I'm addicted to nicotine. I truly believe if I could have one joint a day, just one. I'm not asking to get high off of it. Maybe I don't even want to get
I like
high.
getting high off.
Yeah. This is true. I mean, even. All right.
It's better than drinking.
That was a really long time ago.
I was never a drinker. I like weed, you know.
Yeah, but if I could have that and smoke a puff, I probably wouldn't want a cigarette. You know, when I get the chance to have some, I definitely don't smoke like people that say they are social smokers and they have a drink and they gotta have a cigarette with it. I'm the exact opposite. You give me a little puff off of marijuana cigarette, and I don't want cigarettes.
Yeah.
So I believe with cigarettes, heroin, I really think if we start doing the education and the research on it, scientific research, that we're going to find that this drug's going to help us with the big drug problem. And I don't even like to call it a drug, but I do. It's just the way society has put it. But I believe it's going to help us get our kids away from the harder things
And of course, it's the thing that leads them to it right now because, again, we don't card. Those drug dealers are not going to ask your child. They don't care. You got $20, you get drugs.
Well, there is a sect of drug dealers, because I technically was a drug dealer.
Okay, well,
That would not sell it to children. We had morals, but the majority of your street level drug crime, they don't care if your kid's 12 years old.
right. Well, back in the day when there was a lot of drug dealing going on as well, there were pot dealers and there were drug dealers in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And the pot dealers didn't deal the heavy drugs. Now the hard and soft drugs have been put into one basket with the DEA and with the drug dealers. So we need to break them apart. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
In an article recently in Atlantic Magazine, Sarah Frank, founding director of Moms for Marijuana, said, "If I wanted to, I could sit with a glass of wine in one hand, a coffee cup in the other, with a cigarette pressed between my lips under the influence of prescription narcotics, all the while holding my child in my lap. Everywhere we look, our families are bombarded with advertisements for these drugs. Our societies benefit from taxes placed on the manufacture and sale of these drugs, yet we can't make the decision to choose one of the most commonly used drugs, one that has proven to be much safer than all the rest. That's just not logical." My question to you is, do you agree with Frank's statement? And what are your thoughts on the hazards of marijuana compared to the hazards of legal drugs such as alcohol, tobacco, and prescription medicine? And it seems like you already kind of touched on it. I'll start with you, Rebecca.
Okay. Well, my thoughts on that are, I've done my research, I've Googled it, and I've looked at the national drug abuse data on deaths. I work with Sean Dunnigan of LEAP in DC, and we've discussed this a little bit about the marijuana versus alcohol, tobacco, and pharma. I'm also a tobacco addict. I never did like alcohol, but I lived with an alcoholic that beat me and was very violent. Pharmaceutical drugs, I've had friends overdose and die. I think pretty much of us probably have at some point in life lost somebody to liver toxicity or kidney failure from the use of pharmaceuticals. I personally, tomorrow when I speak, I'll be talking about what I've been through with my health and cannabis and how I am in remission. But I was placed on a high-level narcotic, Oxycontin, that was shutting down my kidney and my liver and various things from a tumor. And I used cannabis to successfully get off of the Oxycontin within about 6 weeks. And this was after 10 years of non-use of cannabis. I was scared to death after what I'd been through to ever use cannabis again, but I got sick. So when it comes to cannabis versus the big three that I call them, the pharmaceutical, alcohol, and tobacco, just look at the death rates. Cannabis has never killed a human being from its use in over 4 million years. It doesn't kill animals either. We got people using this stuff on their dogs and cats out here on tumors, and it's making them fall off. So topically, and that has nothing to do with getting high. But I would look at the death rates and make your judgments based on that. Pharmaceuticals are killing 500,000 people a year, and it's from organ damage because our bodies are natural, and our bodies don't want to accept these synthetic drugs, and they flush them out, as Sharon said. Cannabis remains in your system for 30 days or more, naturally. But these pharmaceuticals and crack cocaine, heroin, they're flushed out of your system within 24 to 48 hours. You can pass a drug test on Monday or Tuesday and you're good to go. So just do your research. That's my advice when it comes to making a conclusion whether it's safer than those substances. The facts are there.
Well, we all know how dangerous the substances are that you were just mentioning. Pharmaceuticals, things that are easily attained. Like I can go to the doctor now and get something that I could sell to someone else. But I also, when I think about where it sounds, I think about sweet tea. How much sugar goes into sweet tea? Coca-Cola, we're not even going to talk about Coca-Cola right now. We'll just stick to the sugar in Coca-Cola. Like how dangerous. I mean, we're getting even more, they're taxing the beverage companies even more because of the health issues that people are getting from sodas. Children getting childhood diabetes from sodas and soft drinks. But when it comes down to something that has healing properties, we can't get it. I would rather, to answer your question, I would rather see my children with cannabis any day than with alcohol and cigarettes. I mean, and I smoke cigarettes in front of my children, I drink alcohol, and I tell my children clearly. I can show them cannabis, they know what cannabis is. They know that this is medicine, this is good for you. This is a cigarette, this is not good for you. I teach them, it's just like that, and they know sodas aren't good for you. So much sugar isn't good for you. So when it comes down to it, it all comes back to education, knowing, what you're working with, and just making a good decision.
Wow. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to take it a step further. What is synthetic marijuana? Really? This is chemicals. I'm going a little off topic here, but the same idea. These kids have youthful indiscretions. Let's be honest. Not every child tries something. Not everybody tries that first cigarette or takes that first drink. I know there's people that have never smoked marijuana. But in general, kids like to experiment. So why are we throwing them in jail for experimentation? We in Georgia spent the money to come up with a chemical, I don't know if you realize this, that they spray on synthetic marijuana. The taxpayers of Georgia brought you synthetic marijuana. There's a gentleman that worked, do you remember what college it was? I don't know. It may have been Clemson or one of them. Was it Clemson?
Yes, ma'am.
And he did all the research and made this chemical. He knew in the back of his mind that he was going to have to produce this research. So, in other words, here's how I made it, kids. Y'all want to make some? Is what he knew was going on. That's what's happened. That man, I'll never forget it. They did an interview with him, and it hit me like a lead balloon. He looked right into the camera at the end of that interview, and he said, if parents want a reason to legalize cannabis, you just found it. Okay? If they don't have something to experiment on with or play around with, if they choose to, they are going to go to something else. We know that everything else has death rates. As they've said, it's never killed anybody. Personally, me, as a business owner, and I'm a mother of 2 adult children now, so I can really say this. I don't want my kids smoking cigarettes. I would much prefer them smoke a joint, honestly. Other than the penalties that they'll get now, but that won't take long. We're going to get this done. I'm looking at all y'all people out there, and y'all are taking this in like sponges, and I see all these advocates growing, and we'll be glad to deal with it, deal with you on, and would love to have y'all on board. But yeah, just I've gotten sidetracked now, and I don't have on my glasses. Just a second.
The International Cannabinoid Research Society is located in Raleigh, North Carolina, RTP. A Cannabinoid Research Society did their annual report in 2010 on K2. Why? K2 has killed people. It's a synthetic form of THC, similar to what they give you in a Marinol pill, which is as well as synthetic THC. The real thing is much better.
I'll make mine very brief and short because I touched on it. The bottom line is, and I think I discussed it in my presentation this morning when we talk about displacement theories and how new synthetic drugs evolve, is all we're doing as from a law enforcement perspective is every time we prohibit a substance, because we're always behind the 8 ball. And so we're just creating bad laws instead of dealing with the problem. And so once again, what has occurred is, from a political perspective, we've caused a moral panic. Okay, all these drug laws that we have are based on moral panics that are caused by politicians enacting the crime du jour. That's the best way to describe it. We have to have good laws, smart laws, laws, that support the rule of law and that are enforced effectively. But the more we prohibit any substance, and I don't care if we want to talk about gambling or prostitution or something else, we cannot be the moral police anymore. We cannot be the moral police of the world, and we cannot be the moral police of our society. We have to give parents and our social institutions the tools necessary to teach our children the truth, employ harm reduction strategies, and realize we're never going to have a drug-free America. Obviously, the Office of the Drug Czar failed in its most important goal setting when they were first implemented in 1988, that by 1996 we would have a drug-free America. Not going to happen. And I think that the issue that we need to go back to is drugs are an inanimate object, just like guns. It's bad behavior that we need to deal with. And we have to understand that people can manage and use drugs effectively. I do so every day when I drink my 3 cups of coffee in the morning and when I have my glass of wine at night. And you know what? I'm a civil libertarian. If people want to smoke, as long as they don't smoke in my house, I don't care. You want to get cancer, that's your business. So we have to just be smart about this and tell the truth and put off the decision for our children as long as possible, because that's the problem.
Speaking to putting it off, you can't put it off when they're selling it in their high schools, in their middle schools. You are not there with your child.
Yeah.
All right, with that we come to our final question, and I would like each panelist, what advice would you give women interested in joining the movement to end marijuana prohibition? And how can they find out more or volunteer for your respective organizations? And we'll start with Sharon. Let's move our way down.
There's, first of all, volunteer sheets out there, so all you gotta do is sign your name and we'll call you. Whichever group you'd like to volunteer with, and if you're not sure, sign up with me. I'll tell you about all of them and throw you to get you their information. Let's see. I would say do like I did. Just start educating yourself. Google marijuana. Read all you can about it. Read all you can about reform and get involved in the movement. You'll meet great people like I have over the last year. I haven't been really involved for very long. And you will learn from them. Just keep your mind open. I would say talk to any and everybody. You can bring up real simply when you pump gas. Everybody is mad as heck about the gas prices. Just look around, everybody's pumping gas in that thing and say, you know what? If we could legalize hemp, gas would probably be $1 a gallon or less. And you don't have to explain it to them, just say the words. And they're going, wow. They may go home and Google it. They may sit in their car right there and get on their computer and on their little phone and Google it and see what it is. You're just wanting to start the conversation and bring people up to speed so they'll want to search out more. You can't sit and give them all the information. Have that elevator speech ready for them. I would say a great way, something that I also did, is watching movies. If you got Netflix, I would suggest first and foremost watch Ken Burns' Prohibition. It is about alcohol.
Yes.
But if you watch that and take alcohol out and put cannabis in everywhere they speak of alcohol, that is exactly the model that we're going to have to follow. We're going to have to go state to state. I want to go up to the feds and say, change it and let us figure it out. But literally, we're going to have to take that model. And we're there. We're going there. We're already on that road, and it's getting us there. Another one I would suggest is the union, the business fine getting high. If you don't know anything about growing or how the black market works or how the medical cannabis works out west or how legalization may work, watch that. It'll give you a lot of information. And the other one would be Robert Platshorn's Should Grandma Smoke Pot? And I would suggest you sit down and watch that with your grandma. Because old people are going to help us do this. When they realize, I always tend to go, because we were so affected by the war on drugs, towards the harms of prohibition. We also need to teach people the benefits of cannabis.
Diane being the teacher today, there's something in law enforcement we call a force multiplier. And I don't believe that we use that effectively or strategically, and we're starting to now. What that means is one voice or one person doing a job doesn't work as well as collective voices gathered together. It's easy to pick us apart one by one. It's pretty darn difficult when we have strategic partners, and I'm going to mention a whole host of them, because it's not just NORML that's in this fight. It's LEAP, it's Students for Sensible Drug Policy, it's the ACLU, it's the Marijuana Policy Project, it's the Drug Policy Alliance, it's every major organization is standing up collectively together to raise our voices. The issue for cannabis consumers is getting you out of the closet, to stand up publicly and to not be afraid. And I understand the fear. I understand that, you know, if we come out of the closet, the cops are going to come in our door. Family members. I know, exactly. I mean, you know what? I've lost a whole host of friends from law enforcement that don't understand where I'm coming from. But yet I've gained so many new allies that I would never go back and change. So force multiplier, you have allies out there that you don't touch effectively or strategically enough. And you should have someone from the ACLU here. You should have someone from the NAACP here.
They were invited.
Yeah, I know.
They just
But you have to engage. You know, here's the thing with LEAP is tomorrow I think I'm going to have 2 freshman new LEAP speakers here. And LEAP, we'd like your money, like every other organization would, but you can join our membership list. We'll send you emails. You can become that part of the platform. But one of the things that LEAP is doing is bridging the strategic organization. So we're making it a mainstream message. So we have a cops and clergy outreach. We have a Moms and Cops outreach that I helped kick off that last year the NORML Women's Alliance came into, which is phenomenal because that provides us so many more avenues. Students for Sensible Drug Policies. I mean, there's all these groups that are incredibly important for all of you to support and be part of. And the message is, you know, what's the clergy concerned about? It's the moral issue. But what should they be concerned about is the social justice issue. And you know what? Go reflect back on Martin Luther King and his work in Atlanta and what he was doing, not just for African Americans, but for all our society.
They pretty much covered what you can do. Another suggestion is get involved in politics. At my age group of people, I'm 47 years old, we really dropped the ball on politics. And I've noticed when I go down to the legislature, because I work in the North Carolina legislature a lot, and I also work in D.C. on following a lot of what's going on with policy, is it's a sea of white-haired people. So we do need to reach out to our family members that are older because they vote. Take that 5 minutes to pick up the phone and make a phone call to your representative. If you have a representative that you voted for, that makes you a constituent. You have some clout. I mean, I look right at them and say, I voted for you. You know, you got to hold these people accountable. And that's what we don't do. We elect these leaders, but then we never follow up with them or hold them accountable on the things that we as an American public really want. They're not listening. There's some big disconnect there. And it's really, I think, in my generation. We're also the generation that kind of dropped the ball on our kids because both parents had to go to work. So our kids are sent to daycare. And you know, years ago, at least one of the parents could stay home. It's not like that anymore. So we have others educating our children now. So my generation kind of flipped the lid. Our parents were strict on us, so we're not so strict on our kids. It's that pendulum swing. And we've got to get back to getting involved in what's going on in policy in this country. Because we're fixing to become the senior citizens. I hate to say that, but one of these days we are going to be that sea of white-haired people. But my stepfather was law enforcement, so and I remember a day when I was young, You know, she's speaking of we got to bridge this gap between law enforcement on this issue and the moms and parents and all our concerns, because there are a lot of good law enforcement out here that are on our side, but they can't say anything. And it's very sad, because when I'm in D.C. doing events, I'll look at the police and say, well, how come you can't say anything? And they're just like, they can't say anything while they're in that uniform. I said, well, do you vote when you're out of that uniform? And they do. So, you know, it's just this, we've got to end the stigma. Science versus Stigma is another good movie that came out of Maine. Ron Norton, he works with me with Overgrowth Government. But my biggest suggestion is really get involved in what's going on with policy. Everything is Googleable anymore. It's simple. Get on there, Google cannabis and cancer, or Google recent marijuana policy. Stuff's going to come up, and read and educate yourself so you can talk to people. And then if you want to get involved with my organization, I am the Assistant Director of Overgrowth Government. We will be in Washington, D.C. next month on April 4/20. It's a Saturday this year, so we're looking for a really good turnout. We work with LEAP. I work with some of her colleagues in D.C. And the purpose of Overgrow, as she said, is to unite everybody. We want NPP there. We want NORML there. We've had NORML Women's Alliance there. We work with LEAP. We have Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We have my organization, the Carolina Cannabis Coalition, which is a sub-chapter of the American Cannabis Coalition under Craig Baresh, who founded SoCal NORML in Southern California. So just get involved and make friends and network. Facebook is an amazing social media network for cannabis. They're out there. You will make cannabis friends. You will meet people in the movement. We have people like Clint Werner, whose grandfather was a senator in North Carolina that's written a book, Marijuana Gateway to Health, excellent read. You know, get yourself really educated and get prepared to go out and talk to people. And as Sharon said, just this past week I was in the grocery store. This old man was behind me, and he only had like a milk and a bag of chips. So I'm like, you can go in front of me. And he's like, oh, thank you. You know, I just found out my prostate cancer is back. And I'm going, you know. We have Tommy Chong, who is cancer-free from prostate cancer, taking cannabis oil as medicine. So educate people. You know, talk to them at the gas pump, the grocery store. Just say, or if you don't feel comfortable like being the educated one, just say, how do you feel about what's going on with marijuana prohibition? Starts a conversation. Go from there. If you'd like to contact me, I'm online on Facebook under my real name, Rebecca Forbes. I have a tumor page because I am a terminal cancer patient fighting cancer that's in remission. You can follow that page. That's Rebecca's Tumor Journey. And my main website is the CarolinaCannabisCoalition.webs.com is where my main site is. But get involved and help us out. We're some real grassroots, hardworking people.
Really short, I would suggest, my suggestion would be that if you're interested in getting involved, don't be afraid. You can get involved on any level. You don't have to be, you know, an outspoken person. If you work a job and you wouldn't want the people working with you to know, I mean, there are so many different types of ways to be an activist. Everybody's not comfortable. No one's going to judge you and be like, oh, you don't want to go out and pump your fist. Like, if you just want to write letters, everything you do makes a difference. So, just really
All right, with that, we'll now open the discussion up to the audience. So if anyone has a question for any of our panelists, feel free. You, sir.
Hopefully all of you can give a very short answer to this. What would be the best thing a man would say to you, okay, a mother, okay, a woman, that would propel her to either think or convince her to look at this whole issue? What, you know, the elevator speech, the 5-second kind of thing, the sound bite, what would be the most effective that would...
Look at your drug arrests.
No, I'm talking, you know, it's a very small conversation. What would be the sound bite? What would be the small conversation that you would like to hear that would propel a woman to actually get involved?
You know, sometimes
Short.
sometimes it's difficult because you don't know what that, that person, so what I do is I look for symbols. Okay, so, if I see some type of symbol that allows me to make the conversation, then I can, because I talk to everyone. Someone was looking at the